He fixed my wicket, brought me soup, and kept quiet. Nobody knew who he really was. And then he took off the gloves and admitted he was the head of the Mafia. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Tell us in the comments what city you're from so we can see where we're being watched. I always start my mornings the same way. There's something sacred about routine at my age, especially when the rest of the world keeps changing like a toddler on a sugar high. I wake up before the sun, slide my feet into those ratty slippers that have been with me longer than most of the people in this neighborhood, and shuffle to the kitchen. My bones creak in protest, but I greet them with the same stubbornness I greet every day. We're still here, I whisper to no one. And that, I suppose, is enough. The kitchen smells like memory, warm wood, dried rosemary, old linoleum scrubbed too many times. But mostly it smells like cinnamon. I keep a jar of it by the coffee pot, and I sprinkle it in with a soft hand, like dusting a secret over boiling truth. My late husband, Gerald, used to tease me about it. Said it was like drinking cookies. But he drank it anyway. Every morning. Sat right at this table, reading the paper out loud, even when I wasn't listening. Gerald's been gone 15 years now. His voice lingers more than his photos. I never took his picture down, though. He's there, above the bread box, in that old black and white from our wedding day. Tie crooked, eyes bright, already balding a little. I talk to him sometimes, not out loud, but in that space behind my ribs, where missing lives. This morning I told him the roses bloomed early. He always said they bloomed late when I was mad at him. The birds were already making a fuss when I stepped outside with my mug. My porch sags like my knees, but it holds. I tossed a handful of seed to the pigeons. They're not glamorous birds, but they're loyal. They come back every day. I admire that. And they don't ask for much, just crumbs and peace. I can relate. That's when I saw him for the first time. He was across the street, leaning against a mailbox that wasn't his. He wore a dark suit, which stuck out in our town like a tuxedo in a laundromat. He wasn't moving much, just watching. Maybe the pigeons. Maybe me. I couldn't tell. His face was still, unreadable. There was something sharp about him, like a photograph that had been developed too dark. I didn't wave, didn't nod, just turned my head back toward the garden. But I felt his eyes follow me, and the hairs on my arms stood like the soldiers in old war photos. It wasn't until Sunday that he spoke. I go to Mount Olive every week. Rain, shine, flu. Doesn't matter. It's not about religion, not really. It's about rhythm. I like the hymns. I like Miss Betty's potato salad at the potluck. I like seeing the same worn pews and the same faces, some kinder than others. That Sunday, though, he was there. Sat down right next to me like he belonged. Didn't say a word through the whole sermon. Just sat still, not fidgeting like the younger folks. I noticed his hands, gloved in black leather. That stuck with me. Gloves. In Georgia. In April. When the service ended and we were all filing out into the light, he turned to me. His voice was like gravel. Low, but not unpleasant. "You smell like cinnamon and sorrow," he said. I blinked. "Pardon?" He smiled then. Just a sliver. Just enough to tell me it was real. "The cinnamon is warm. The sorrow is old. I didn't mean to be rude." I looked at him full on for the first time. His eyes were the color of storm clouds right before they burst. I should have been annoyed, creeped out. But I wasn't. Not yet. I just offered him the kind of smile I used to give my students when they said something strange, but not wrong, and I walked away. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Monday, he was at the farmer's market. I saw him near the tomatoes, hands still gloved, nodding at the lady who sold jams. He didn't come up to me, just looked over once, like he was checking the weather. I kept walking. Tuesday, he was outside the library, reading a book I couldn't see the cover of. Still in the same kind of suit. Too formal, too careful. He didn't wave. Wednesday, I caught him near my mailbox, pretending to admire the rose bushes. My roses aren't anything special, just stubborn enough to survive, but he crouched down and inhaled like he'd never seen flowers before. By Thursday, I asked Odelia next door, "You have some relative in town?" She blinked and sipped her iced tea. "That tall man in the wool suit. He says he's my grandson, calls himself Tony. I didn't know I had a grandson named Tony, but he's been helping me with the gutters, so I let him be." That gave me pause. Helping with gutters in leather gloves? Something didn't sit right. But I kept quiet. Some things settle better when you let them steep. Friday morning, I opened my door and found my porch rail sanded smooth and freshly painted. I hadn't asked anyone, and there was no note, just a faint whiff of turpentine and cinnamon. He'd been there. On Saturday, the cat, Fitzgerald, named after the author, not the president, refused to come inside. I found him curled up on my porch swing, purring like a motorboat, and there he was again, sitting beside the cat, stroking him gently, gloved. He looked up. "I didn't mean to intrude. He came to me. He doesn't like people." He smiled. "Neither do I." I didn't invite him in, but I didn't ask him to leave. That's when it started. The unease, the questions. Why did he always wear gloves? Why did he never park a car? Why did no one else in town seem to care that a stranger in a funeral suit was suddenly fixing porches and petting cats? I sat in my rocker that night, staring out at the garden. I thought of Gerald, of his laugh, his way of tapping the table when he was trying to hide excitement. He wouldn't have trusted this Tony. Gerald had a sixth sense for trouble. But Gerald wasn't here anymore, and I couldn't deny it. When that man looked at me, something in my chest stirred. Not quite romance. Not yet. But something old. Something I'd buried. The next morning, Sunday again, I wore a scarf with a little more colour than usual. Dusty rose. I saw him before he saw me, standing under the dogwood tree outside the church. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept. But when he noticed me, his eyes lit just a little. He walked beside me after the service. "You like music?" he asked. "I like quiet more." "That's music too." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. We reached my house, and he paused at the steps. "I could fix the screen door," he offered. "It creaks." "It's supposed to creak. Keeps raccoons from sneaking up on me." He chuckled. An unexpected sound. Deep. Real. "Fair enough," he said. Then added, almost as an afterthought, "You have good eyes. Most people don't see what's real." I looked at him hard then, at the way his suit hung just a little too perfectly, at the way his hands never left his pockets, at the sadness behind his charm. "I don't see everything," I replied. "Just what matters." He didn't answer, but he tipped his head, touched the brim of an invisible hat, and walked away. That night, I didn't talk to Gerald. Not because I forgot, but because for the first time in 15 years, I didn't feel alone. The following days melted into each other like butter on hot cornbread. Everything in town looked the same. The cracked sidewalks, the leaning mailboxes, the magnolias shedding their thick petals like tired dancers. But I didn't feel the same. Something inside me, some tightly coiled thread I'd left untouched for years, had started to loosen. He didn't disappear. That was the strange part. Men like him, I assumed, blew through towns like storms. Unsettling, unforgettable, but brief. But Tony, as Odelia called him, stayed. Every day he showed up somewhere nearby, not close enough to impose, not far enough to forget. One morning, I caught him sweeping leaves off my walkway before I was even out of bed. Another time, he handed me a jar of peach preserves through the screen door, saying only, "Miss Ruth gave me too many." I didn't ask how he knew I liked peach. I didn't need to. We didn't talk much, not at first. Our conversations were slow, soft, like old jazz records playing at half speed. He never pushed. He'd show up, sit with Fitzgerald curled at his feet, and ask about my roses, or my husband, or the history of our little town, which I knew better than the librarian. He listened. That surprised me most. Most people, when they talk to old women, talk at them, or over them, as if our words are too slow to matter. But Tony listened like my words were precious currency, like he was starving and I was feeding him piece by piece. Once I told him how Gerald and I met, at a school dance in '68, when I was a young teacher, and he was the janitor's son who crashed the party with grease-stained jeans and a dimple that could have sold tickets. Tony chuckled softly. "Did you fall for him right away?" he asked. "No," I said. "I fell for the way he looked at me, like I wasn't just a woman in a dress, but a whole book he wanted to read." Tony nodded, his gaze distant. "I don't think I ever looked at anyone like that," he murmured. He started helping around the house without asking. Fixed the gutter, mended a broken step on the porch. I'd hear him whistling, a strange, mournful melody with no words, while he worked, always with gloves on. One afternoon I asked, "Don't your hands get hot in those things?" He looked at me a moment too long before replying, "They're a reminder." Of what? He didn't answer. But that evening, after he left, I sat in my chair and imagined what kind of life would make a man keep gloves on while planting flowers. The more time we spent together, the more pieces slipped through the cracks. Hints, ghosts, shadows in the corners of his stories. He told me he never went to a real school, that most of what he knew came from books he found in places he shouldn't have been. He didn't say jail, but the silence around the word was loud. One day, he arrived with a paper bag and said, "I brought dinner." Inside was a lopsided meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and overcooked green beans. The potatoes were undersalted and the meatloaf crumbled like sand, but I ate every bite. "It's terrible," he admitted. I smiled. "It's effort. That's tastier than anything in my fridge." We ate on the porch, watching the fireflies blink across the lawn. Fitzgerald sat on his lap like he'd known him since kittenhood. After the plates were clean and the sun was nearly gone, he looked at me. "You think people can change?" His voice was low, almost apologetic. "I think people reveal themselves," I said. "Change is just peeling off the parts that were hiding the real you." He didn't respond, just stared into the dark like it had answers I couldn't give. Then came the night I got sick. It was nothing dramatic, just a summer cold, the kind that settles in your chest and makes breathing feel like hauling wood uphill. I didn't tell anyone, didn't want a fuss, but Tony noticed. He showed up uninvited, holding a steaming bowl of chicken soup, wearing an apron that said "Kiss the Cook" in red letters. I don't know where he got it. I didn't ask. "You're pale," he said. "I'm always pale." "Your voice sounds like gravel." I coughed. "Matches yours, then." He smiled, just barely. "You shouldn't be alone." He stayed that night. Sat on the armchair beside my bed, reading aloud from a book he brought. Steinbeck, I think. His voice wasn't polished, but it was careful, deliberate. He stumbled over the longer words like someone unfamiliar with their taste, but he didn't stop. I drifted off somewhere between pages, lulled by the rhythm and the weight of company. When I woke up, the sun was bleeding through the curtains, and Tony was asleep in the chair, head tilted back, gloves still on, Fitzgerald curled up on his chest. I made us breakfast that morning, weak tea and burnt toast, but he ate it like it was a feast. You don't have to keep showing up, I said, watching him butter his toast with gloved fingers. He looked at me and shook his head. But I want to. Later that week, I invited him to dinner. Not out of pity. Out of something I hadn't felt in years. Comfort. Curiosity. Maybe even the first notes of trust. He arrived on time. Of course he did. Holding a bottle of something I couldn't pronounce and a bouquet of slightly wilted daisies. Got them from the gas station, he said sheepishly. Didn't want to come empty-handed. I set the table with the good plates, the ones I only used on Thanksgiving. Gerald's chair stayed empty. It always would. But I didn't feel like I was replacing anyone, just making space. Dinner was fine. Chicken casserole, green beans, peach cobbler from Miss Ruth's freezer. We talked about old music, books he pretended to know, places he'd seen but never loved. He said Italy was too loud, that he liked quiet now. When we were done, I brought out coffee, the same cinnamon blend I always made. He took a sip, exhaled. This, he said, is what peace tastes like. Then slowly, carefully, he pulled off his gloves. I didn't gasp. I didn't flinch. But inside, I froze. His hands were ruined, not disfigured exactly, but marked. Scars like lightning bolts across his knuckles. A tattoo I couldn't read. A missing fingertip. They told stories without voices. He noticed me staring and tried to put the gloves back on. Don't, I said. He looked up. I've seen worse, I lied. He smiled. A real smile. A thank you without words. Then he looked down at his hands like they didn't belong to him. I used these to hurt people, he whispered. Now I use them to fix screen doors. We sat in silence a long time after that. The kind of silence that isn't empty. The kind that says, I see you. The kind that asks, do you still want to stay? And I did. That night, as he left, he paused on the porch. I don't deserve this, he said. No one does, I replied. That's why it matters. He nodded once and walked into the night, leaving his gloves on the kitchen counter. I stood there, holding them, unsure of what to feel. They were heavier than they looked, and for the first time, I wondered if what I felt wasn't just curiosity or comfort, but the slow burn of something else. Something reckless. Something real. It was a Tuesday when the truth broke through. The sky was the color of dishwater, and the air clung to my skin like a memory I didn't ask for. I was walking back from Miss Ruth's bakery, carrying a small bag of pecan tarts and a jar of her famous chow chow, when I saw it happen. Two men were talking outside the corner store, one local, one clearly not. The out-of-towner had slicked back hair, a tan suit that belonged in another decade, and sunglasses, even though the sun wasn't shining. The local was Henry Wilkes, a man who'd never whispered in his life. They weren't exactly arguing, but something about the posture of their shoulders made me stop. That's when I heard it, loud and clear. I know that face, Henry said. That's Devell something. Della something. The one from New York. He's supposed to be dead. My heart didn't skip a beat. It dropped like a stone in a well. I walked faster, ignored the ache in my knees, the sweat gathering at my temples. My bag was cutting into my fingers, but I didn't stop until I was home. Fitzgerald met me at the porch, rubbing against my leg, purring like a siren, but I barely noticed. I set the bag down, went straight to the drawer with my old laptop, the one I used only to order books and email my niece twice a year. I typed the name slowly. Tony, grandson of Odelia. Then I tried variations. Della, something. Della Vici? Delvano? And then I found it. Antonio Del Vecchio. The headline was all I needed. Where is the ghost of the Eastern Syndicate? I clicked. There he was. A photo from 15 years ago, grainier than I expected, but unmistakably him. Same mouth, same eyes, just younger, harder. His hair was slicked back, his suit sharper, his jaw clenched like he was daring the world to touch him. Words swam before me. Extortion, racketeering, murder, disappearances, federal immunity, trial collapse, rumors of exile. I couldn't breathe. For 20 minutes I sat there, staring at that frozen image of the man who'd fixed my porch swing, who'd brought me soup and held Fitzgerald like a fragile thing. That same man had ordered people killed, had at one time ruled blocks of a city I'd never set foot in. That man had blood on his hands, and I'd let him touch my silverware. I stood up so fast my chair screeched across the floor. And then I waited. I didn't call the police. I didn't tell Odelia. I didn't text anyone. Not that I had anyone to text. I just waited. Like a woman in a ghost story, waiting for the truth to knock. He came around 5, same time he always did, as if it were on some unspoken schedule we never admitted to. He was wearing a light blue shirt this time. No jacket, no gloves. "Hi," he said, setting down a small brown bag. "I brought you that fancy mustard you like." I didn't answer. I just looked at him, the way I imagine you look at a spider once you realize it's poisonous. He paused. "You okay?" "You lied to me." His body stilled, not in fear, in readiness, like a man who had known this moment was coming all along. "I didn't lie," he said quietly. "I just didn't tell you." "That's not better." "No." I stepped back and folded my arms. The screen door creaked between us. "You're Antonio Del Vecchio." He sighed, like someone setting down a burden he'd carried too long. "I was." I barked a laugh, bitter and sharp. "Was? What? You think that washes off? You think you can plant tomatoes and fix screen doors and suddenly you're a whole new man?" "No," he said, and his voice was low, steady. "I don't think that. I know what I've done." I couldn't look at him anymore. I turned my face toward the garden. The roses were blooming, blood red and unapologetic. "How many people?" I asked. "I don't know." He didn't even try to lie. "That's worse," I whispered. "I was 21 when they first gave me a gun. I didn't even ask for it. They just put it in my hand and told me who to point it at." "Then you had a choice." He nodded. "And I made the wrong ones, over and over." He stepped up to the screen, didn't touch it, didn't try to come inside. "I'm not here to pretend I'm someone I'm not, Miss Bell. I'm here because for the first time, I didn't want to lie anymore. I didn't want to run. I wanted to believe him. That was the worst part. I wanted to believe that this man with his quiet voice and his terrible cooking and his damaged hands was not just the sum of his sins. But I didn't say any of that. I told him to leave. And he did. No questions. No protest. Just turned and walked away. Down the path he'd spent weeks tending, past the porch he repaired, out of my line of sight. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my chair with the old quilt Gerald's mother made, and I listened to the creaks in the house, the wind scratching the windows, the silence pressing down like a second skin. The next morning, there was no sign of him, none the next day either, or the one after that. But someone else came, 2 men in suits, not the flashy kind, the hard kind. One wore mirrored glasses. The other had a clipboard he didn't look at. They knocked like people who don't knock often. "You know a man named Tony?" the clipboard one asked. I crossed my arms. "Depends on who's asking." He flashed a badge. "FBI. He's in trouble?" I asked. "He's gone off plan." I stared. What plan? The man in glasses spoke this time. Mr. Del Vecchio was cooperating. Under federal protection, he was given clearance to relocate under the condition he remained off-grid. No contact, no exposure. I leaned against the doorframe. My knees felt soft. What do you want from me? We want to know if he said anything, about why he's here. I said nothing. After a moment, they nodded, like they didn't expect much anyway. As they walked off the porch, the clipboard man muttered, "He gave up everything, money, security, even his people, for a town that didn't want him." That hit me harder than I expected. Later that day, he returned. I heard his steps before I saw him. There's a weight to guilt that you can feel in a man's boots. He stood at the edge of my porch, hands bare, eyes tired. I told them I was done, he said. I didn't move. I gave up immunity. Gave up whatever scrap of protection I had. Signed it all away. Why? I asked, my voice a rasp. Because this is the only place I ever felt human. I swallowed. You might die. He nodded. I know. And you came back anyway? He stepped forward, slow. If I have a choice of dying out there as a name in a file, or dying here, with you remembering my real face, I choose here. The wind picked up then, rustling the leaves and something deeper inside me. I looked at him, really looked. Past the scars, past the old stories, past the fear. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but stripped, like a king who'd taken off his crown and didn't miss the weight of it. You want coffee? I asked finally. His shoulders dropped. A breath escaped him. I'd like that. I opened the door. That night, we sat at the kitchen table. Two people without illusions. Two stories with jagged pages. He said nothing else about his past, and I didn't ask. But I noticed he didn't bring his gloves. He never wore them again. The first morning of our new arrangement began without ceremony. No dramatic declarations, no trembling hands reaching across the breakfast table. Just the rattle of the old kettle, the creak of my bones, and the smell of cinnamon in the air. Tony, Antonio, was outside by the time I stepped onto the porch, barefoot, sleeves rolled, sweeping pollen off the steps like he was born to it. He looked different without the gloves, vulnerable, unarmored, and in a way more dangerous than ever, because now he was real. He glanced up. Your porch gets filthy in spring. I grunted. Everything does. That's the South. Heat, dust, and second chances. He smiled softly and leaned on the broom like it was a walking stick. I'm going to repaint the shutters today, he said. The greens faded. You don't have to. I want to. That became our rhythm. He lived in the small tool shed out back that he'd fixed up with insulation and a fan. It wasn't much. No plumbing, no heat. But he insisted. Said it felt honest. Every morning he came up to the main house just after sunrise, just in time for coffee and chores. He didn't speak about his past unless I asked, and even then, the answers were short. Clipped. Like words hurt coming out of his mouth. He mowed lawns for widows, helped the church fix its sagging bell tower, and once spent 2 hours guiding a turtle across Route 17 so it wouldn't get hit. At night, he read, sometimes aloud, sometimes silently beside me in the living room. Fitzgerald adored him, slept on his lap most evenings, and hissed if I tried to move him. One afternoon, while Tony was retiling the walkway, I came outside with sweet tea. He stood, sweat dampening his shirt, dirt smudging his cheek. I handed him the glass and asked, "What were you going to be before you became what you became?" He took a sip, stared into the yard. "A mechanic," he said. "I liked taking things apart, figuring them out." I nodded. "You're good at putting things back together." He looked at me then, eyes soft. Not everything. It wasn't romantic, not in the way people expect. There were no kisses under moonlight, no whispered dreams of growing old together. We were already old. But it was something deeper, a kind of closeness that grew in silence. Trust, seeded and watered by time. And then came the first crack. It was a Thursday when I found the dead bird. Right by the roses, neck twisted in an unnatural angle, feathers still warm. A mockingbird. The state bird of Georgia. Its body had been laid deliberately, not fallen, and there was a single black feather tied to its leg with red thread. I picked it up with gloved hands, his gloves, the ones I kept in a drawer, and buried it under the dogwood tree. That night, I told him. His expression didn't change, but the air did. The quiet around him turned colder. "Someone knows I'm here," he said. "Someone dangerous?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." I set the kettle on the stove and poured us both tea. My hands didn't shake. I was surprised at that. "You have to go," I said. "No. They'll kill you." "I know." I turned to face him. "Then why are you staying?" He took my hand, and his fingers were rough, calloused, but steady. "Because I'm done running. I ran for 15 years, hid, bargained, lied. I'm tired. And this is the first place I ever felt like more than a ghost." "You're not a ghost," I whispered. He gave a sad smile. "You say that now." That night we locked the doors for the first time in months. Fitzgerald growled at the windows. I kept the porch light on and slept with a hammer beside the bed. Old instincts from another life kicked in, the one where Gerald used to travel for work, and I was left to defend the house from noises I couldn't name. The next morning, nothing happened, nor the next. But on Sunday, just as we were returning from church, we found the screen door hanging from one hinge, the living room tossed, books strewn across the floor, and a message carved into my kitchen table. "You don't get to disappear." I didn't cry. Tony told me to pack a bag. I refused. "If we run, they win," I said. "And I've run enough in my own life. From grief, from fear, from feeling anything at all." He looked at me then. Really looked. Not like a man who wanted to protect a woman, but like a man who'd finally met his equal. "I can't keep you safe," he said. "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to finish what you started." We repaired the door together. He hammered. I held the frame steady. And when the sun went down, we sat on the steps with our tea, watching the fireflies return like tiny lanterns in the dark. That night, he told me the rest. How he'd been groomed since he was a teenager. How he rose through the ranks, not because he was cruel, but because he was clever. How he made deals with devils and watched the light go out of men's eyes. He didn't weep, didn't dramatize. "I wasn't a monster," he said, "but I helped them, and that's worse." I didn't say anything, because sometimes forgiveness isn't words, sometimes it's just staying. The next week, life returned to a strange kind of normal. The shutters got painted. I taught Tony how to make a proper biscuit, and he taught me how to change the oil in my car. We avoided the news. We didn't mention the men who might come, but we stayed vigilant. And then, just when I'd almost convinced myself the threat had passed, I came home from the market to find Tony sitting on the steps, blood on his shirt, a gash across his temple. I dropped the groceries. "What happened?" "They sent someone," he said. He wasn't subtle. My hands trembled as I cleaned the wound, cursing under my breath like the old sailor my grandfather had been. He winced, but didn't complain. "Did you kill him?" I asked. "No." "Why not?" He met my eyes. "Because I wanted you to still look at me like this." My heart broke and healed in the same breath. That night, I made soup, sat beside him on the couch. We didn't speak. Fitzgerald curled between us, a purring bridge. A few days later, Sheriff Maddox dropped by, said a strange man had been found wandering near the bus station, bruised and confused. No ID, no clue, nothing stolen. We played dumb. Maddox didn't press, just tipped his hat and left. Weeks passed. Spring melted into early summer. The garden exploded with life. Roses, tulips, mint. The tomato vines climbed higher than they had in years. We stopped waiting for bad things, started planting more. And then one day, while sitting on the porch, Tony handed me a tiny box. Inside was a single seed. Olive tree, he said. Symbol of peace. Thought maybe we could start one here. I didn't cry, but my hands were shaking as I buried it beneath the window. On our last night in the story worth telling, we sat beneath the stars with 2 mugs of cinnamon coffee and nothing but silence between us. He turned to me and said, "If I die tomorrow, I want you to know. This was my redemption." "No," I said. "This was your beginning." He smiled and kissed the back of my hand, and that was enough. The next morning, the birds sang louder than they ever had. The sun rose like forgiveness. The garden was blooming, and the gloves were still in the drawer, untouched. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more. Check out the next video for another unforgettable journey. And if you think someone else needs to hear this, feel free to share it.